You can trust your intuition when you have expertise. In this world, when everything is in order, when there are no rules, or I would say when there are rules rather at this particular perspective, and everything is in order, you develop the expertise fairly quickly. However, in the chaotic world, which we know we are in, there are no rules and it takes time, opportunities to learn the rules, develop some intuitions, and take constant feedbacks. Eventually, you develop some expert intuitions. Everyone around us, including me, have these intuitions, which in some form, we would say expert intuitions again, like crossing the street. We can evaluate at a glance whether it's safe or not to cross. If we talk about loved ones, just hearing on the telephone, you can understand if they are in a good mood or not. So these are some of the expertise which we develop and create those intuitions as we go along in our life journey. Where you do not have, then you just hope to make it right. Now, if you're wondering where Saurabh is going with all these things and why he's talking so much about intuition is because today we have a guest, an intuition expert, I would say, Sheila Vijeyarasa. Sheila, welcome to the show.
Saurabh, it is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is all mine. So let's give some kind of credentials to the listeners and viewers here about Sheila. So she holds an MBA and have around 15 years of experience in publishing and media, preceded by around 8 years of experience in chartered accounting and banking. She was also a chief financial officer of a global publishing company, founder of Empowering Intuition. Yes, so intuition again comes in here. A qualified NLP practitioner. She's into psychic reading, oracle reading, deep healing. Author of a book, Brave, Courageously Live Your Truth. We definitely would like to know more about that book as well. Being featured in Thrive Global, Sydney Morning Herald, Body Plus Soul, CEO, World Magazine, New Idea, Women's Agenda, CFO Australia, and the list can go on and on. I can take a pause here. And again, Sheila, this is very impressive. And again, thank you so much for spending some time on this show here.
It is such a pleasure to be here, Saurabh, and my favorite topic too.
Definitely. So let's get started. Apart from all this thing, if you would like to spend some time about explaining who is Sheila, what's your answer?
I think, like many people, I'm many things, and I feel like I've stepped into my soul purpose, my life purpose, much later in life. And so the way I answer that question now is much different to the way I'd answer that question a decade ago, because Saurabh, I've used my intuition and I've been very brave in my life to become very authentic. I don't know if this would resonate with many of your listeners, but I feel like I was living a life by someone else's belief sets and values for most of my career. And then when I had my awakening, my spiritual awakening, you might call it, I realized I had these intuitive abilities and that I really wanted to work in a healing space and a transformation space as a mentor and coach. I found this whole transition really hard, moving from being a corporate executive into this space. And that's why I wrote my book, Brave, Courageously Live Your Truth, because I think it involves so much courage and bravery to do that. So if I describe who I am now, I think I'm a really brave woman that is constantly seeking more truth within myself.
That's wonderful. So as you mentioned about intuitive abilities, or I would like to maybe dig deeper on intuition, first of all, because that is one of the things which we get started. What's your perspective about intuition and how people develop and how you have developed in certain areas, I would say?
Every single one of us has intuition and remarkable intuition. And intuition is generally the first piece of information we receive. Depending on how we live our life, if we're not honoring ourselves, if we're fearing being abandoned by family and friends and are people-pleasing and perfectionists, our intuition shuts down. because we're working from a space of anxiety or needing to perform. And so we won't listen to our intuition. We'll listen to the voices outside of ourselves versus the inner voice. However, when we're really in a place of trusting our intuition, you'll feel it firstly as a gut feeling or as a knowing. That's, I feel like, most of the population of the world experiences intuition. As you become more advanced, you start to have all your psychic senses activated. And after an awakening, we become much more sensitive. So the way we receive intuitive information becomes much clearer. So we start seeing intuitive guidance, potentially when we're dreaming, in the dream state, when we're asleep. We start visualizing and manifesting through meditation. We'll close our eyes and start visualizing that perfect partner walking into our life or getting that job promotion. We start hearing signs and people giving us advice, and we start listening to it. And even that is intuition coming from outside of ourselves through some other people. We start feeling and knowing a lot more strongly. And if we start cultivating like morning meditation practices, a channeling practice at night, you'll start, we're carving out, I guess, time in our day to receive psychic intuitive information. But we have to be very intentional. If we don't carve out the time and make the time to sit with ourselves, we won't get that intuitive information.
That's interesting. So as you mentioned about the meditation and awakening, so what exactly that means to a common man who used to think intuition about the things which I just started off, right? Like crossing the street. You get those intuitions based on the experiences of recurring incidents happening again and again in your life. What's the difference between that intuition and the intuition which you are describing here?
I guess the only difference is that I am getting more information. I'm trusting and acting on it. And when you trust and act on that information, it becomes deeper and deeper. So when you cross the road and you get intuition to stop because there's a car that's about to hit you, that's a very survival-based instinct, survival-based intuition. It doesn't help you step into your life purpose. This doesn't help you bring in a soulmate. It's very much intuition you use just to get through the day, not much more than that. But when you start moving your consciousness higher and higher, you can use your intuition to discover your life purpose, to change your life to be more in alignment with what you want to do. The main reason why we shut down our intuition is because we don't want to know the truth. The truth can be inconvenient at times. The truth might be leave this marriage, it's not working any longer, or quit the job. The bullying you're having at work doesn't work anymore. It's not good for you. But we don't want to do that because quite often intuition is going to take us into a space of transition. And humans, we like safety and security. We're not very good at transition. Real high-performing executives and entrepreneurs, they thrive in transition and they use their intuition because transitions are always going to take you to the next stage of your growth and expansion. And if you're playing it safe and secure, you don't need intuition. You just need routine. You need process and you need predictability. And you don't need your intuition if you've been doing the same thing every day for years on end. But you do need your intuition if you're making big changes in your life. So that's the big difference between crossing the road and living a life of true expansion, growth, and purpose. Intuition's essential.
Yeah, I think I agree with that part. As you mentioned that we are always complacent the way how the thing works. And if the things are working wonderful, we don't want to touch that. That is first thing. And then, as you mentioned, that transition is not something which has come inherently. You have to take some efforts. And human being by default, the two things which human being is, I would say, try to get, I would say, afraid of is one thing is suffering and other thing is death. So if you are removing those things and try to take a leap forward or lead into a transition, as you mentioned, that's where you can get other spectrum of life. So that's so true. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So in the intuition side, you wrote a book on the bravery of, say, brave. So how that thing align, if it aligns, and what's your perspective of being brave?
I love these questions because I love speaking about bravery. So it takes bravery when you get an intuitive hit to trust that this is something that's going to take you to where you want to go. So it requires courage to overcome the fears that come up and limiting beliefs about making any change in our life. You know, I talk about the courageous path in my book. I don't refer to it as spiritual path. I call it the courageous path because the path of becoming who we are requires great courage. You know, people often ask, what does an awakening mean? Awakening means awakening to your true self and realizing that the way we've been living our life has been highly conditioned. That's all an awakening is, very simple. We're awakened to the truth of who we are. Also, what happens when we have an awakening, we realize our ego has been driving the show. So the ego is being about making everyone happy. And when we make everyone happy, we feel very good about who we are. We feel very good about ourselves. So once we have our awakening, like trusting intuition it becomes essential. I think one thing I've written in my book, there's a chapter about how to receive signs from the universe. So signs is a way of your intuition working, and it's a way of your guides or your higher self connecting with you. So it takes bravery to receive a sign from the universe and act on it. Again, it's another psychic hit. So bravery is about leaving this old life behind. And Saurabh, I don't know if you've ever had to do this, but, you know, we get burnt out. We're perfectionists. We're working too long and hard, and we're not making any time to work on ourselves, heal from past relationships, bring in our soulmate, or we're not working on healthy communication so we can communicate with our partners and have much more balance when we've got families and careers. So bravery means leaving that version of ourselves behind and stepping into the new version. And that version is, hey, I want to quit my job and I want to transition into this career that's going to, you know, give me great fulfillment. Or I want to actually get that promotion at work, and I'm going to be really brave and have these new brave conversations around what that looks like. See, bravery is always going to take us into a space of great discomfort, because we're always going to be having new conversations. We're going to have to, you know, have conversations with our parents, especially if if there's ethnic families. You know, I'm Sri Lankan heritage, and different generations, different cultures can be quite conservative. And culturally, it might, you know, leaving the pack, leaving the group think behind might be really hard, depending on your social group, depending on your what generation you belong to. But I believe it doesn't matter what flavor it is, we all have to be brave.
So how exactly, when we say brave, I think in your book, you have focused more towards women, about how they can be brave, and they are having a different part of their lives. They can be a mother, they can be a sister, they can be entrepreneur, and a wife, and so on and so forth. And sometimes in kind of going through all these responsibilities, they forget what their true sense, what is their awakening, I would say, what you mentioned, would be. So how exactly these transition happens? So maybe I'll say that, what's your personal experience? I think most of the people are not born like that. And they have their own ways of doing things. When we are teenagers, when we have getting into our 20s, we have certain things in our life. We can get attracted towards certain things out there. We don't think about those things too deeply. Not everyone, obviously, there are people having a different mindset. But were you always like that, always curious, or something switched and you were like, okay, I'm a new Sheila now?
I think that's a really insightful question, because I think healers were very wounded once upon a time. Great teachers were always great students. And so I was very unbrave. in the early parts of my life. I was a chronic perfectionist and people pleaser, and I did everything to make everyone happy around me, and always at the cost of myself. I had very poor boundaries, and I became a chartered accountant. I ended up becoming a chief financial officer, a CFO. I did an MBA with distinction, and as I was going further and further on my career, I was starting to feel more and more dissatisfied with my career. The people I was working with were great. The companies were fantastic. It was just, this was not in alignment to me anymore. But how do you tell a Sri Lankan parent, I'm going to quit my job and go and start my own business, and I'm going to take a year off and write a book? Because I still needed the validation of my family, of friends, of people around me. And it doesn't matter how old you are. It's a good sense check to ask yourself, who am I doing this for? And I ended up realizing I was doing my career for everyone, but it wasn't making me happy. So it was really brave. And we often think, Saurabh, of bravery in the larger sense, big acts and gestures of saving someone else's life. We rarely think of bravery in the smaller sense, small acts of saving my own life. But it was the little brave acts I took that I think have been the bravest things I've done in my life. Quitting my job, walking away from my career, writing my book, because it felt like a calling. So, for people listening, my question to you is, do you have a calling? And if you don't do this calling by the end of your life, how will it feel? If you don't do it in the next 10 years or 5 years or 3 years or 1 year, what's your deadline for this calling? Saurabh, for you clearly had a calling to start this podcast. And at some point you were like, I can't wait another second. I have to start. And that transitional phase is so uncomfortable, because I had to sit and start writing. And anyone that's ever written a book, it's always really bad, the first draft. It's usually the first book you ever do. I'm starting to write my second book, but the first book's always, like you're struggling, your self-esteem, you can't write. I'm an accountant. I work with, numbers, not words. And you would have had that too, Saurabh, buying all the podcast equipment, figuring out how to record, making a load of mistakes. I think keeping on getting up after all of the mistakes and setbacks, I think that's brave. So that's how I've been brave, quitting my job and starting this new business and writing my book, because I just, every door I walked through was the door in front of me. That's all I did, was walk through the one door in front of me. And we don't think of that as brave. We're waiting for big showy things on social media, but just doing the right next step, it could be the bravest thing you do today.
That's so true. Actually, a few things resonate with me as well. As you mentioned that you have a Sri Lankan heritage. I'm from India, so I can understand that when you do these kind of based on our cultures, if you say that I'm quitting a job, a well-cushioned job, and maybe get into podcasting or maybe write a book, we all know what kind of reactions we get from our loved ones. Obviously, few things is because of the fear, as I mentioned before, that the suffering. People do not want to get into a suffering. And then obviously the fear of unknown, and a lot of things comes into the picture. You also mentioned about you having a very much good lifestyle from the outside. I mean, people say that, oh, wow, I mean, she is in the executive level. She might be happy what she's going through and all. And but obviously internally, you may not be that much happy. Because you may get everything out there, but still, when you hit the bed at the night and you're still thinking about, am I happy? Am I still thinking, are you at peace, as you mentioned before in the part of that? If that is not the answer, then I think maybe you are going through those societal proceedings that you have to be in a certain way, in a certain position that deems out to be successful. And then you took that brave step. And this is something which I've seen a lot of my guests as well. First of all, as you mentioned, again, I resonate in a way, not my personal experience. I got a few guests who wrote a book, and they said that writing a book is a pretty torturous, I would say in a way, experience, because you need so much of patience. Your first draft, as you mentioned, may not be good. It's a whole process. And then at the same time, one of my guests also mentioned that What happens if your book is not a bestseller? How you cope up that? Because when the things do not work in the way which you have always envisioned, that's where your true, I would say, personality comes into the picture, because we can say all these things that, for example, be a leader, try to empathize and all, but if you cannot practice that, then what's the use of that? So, which is great. So you mentioned about these things and get to the mode. So help us walk through when you wrote a book, and then how exactly that pans out, because obviously one thing leads to another. You left the job, you wrote a book, you might have peaks and valleys, whether you think maybe, have I made a right decision? And now you are in front of us speaking about all your experiences. So help us walk through how exactly the next half of your journey went through.
So when you make any changes in life towards your purpose, you've got to realize peace isn't going to just come immediately. And I now run my own business. So anyone that runs their own business knows that you've got to become friends with chaos, not peace, on some level. And again, moving away from safety and predictability really has meant I've had to be really okay with failing. See, I didn't fail in my corporate career. I had a lot of success. I definitely had failures at points in time. But writing a book was stepping into such an unknown. And in fact, the first draft of the manuscript got rejected. My publisher said, you're not being vulnerable enough. So what happened was COVID hit at the beginning of 2020, because I spent 2019 writing my book. When COVID hit, we went into lockdown, and I spent 3 months rewriting the whole book again. And I resubmitted it in May 2020, and they said, this is amazing. We want this. So I got the publishing contract, and by the following May, it was on bookshelves in bookstores in Australia, and in September, it was released in the US. And the following March, it was released in French. A French publisher bought the rights. So I had to endure 18 months of not knowing what I was doing, getting mentors and editors to help me, a first rejection by a publisher, another publisher rejected me. And then finally, I gave it one last push, and I thought, I'm here to do this. I didn't quit my job for nothing. And, I made it. And I truly believe we all succeed. It just depends on what success is. And I had a dear friend of mine say to me, Sheila, success comes from not quitting. So, I'm on stages now speaking, and that is a whole lot of new fears that have come up. And there are days where I think, I don't know if I can do this. This is really challenging. But I remember the words that got me to the book and how hard that was. And I thought, well, I'm prepared to do this work to get through the next stage. So I personally believe we've got to hold our dreams and our visions, and we've got to hold them through resilience and with bravery.
Yes. Yep. You said beautifully. And this is something, obviously, everyone must resonate who try something different, whether they are creating a new company, writing a book, starting up something totally different from their past experience. And I think when you really have a clarity about purpose in your life, your center of gravity becomes that. So even though if you just keep on straying once in a while, you will it's a kind of a magnet. You can just come back again, because you know that why you have started this at the first place. So you mentioned about vulnerability, and I love Brené Brown's book, and one is Dare to Lead, if you have read that, and I just written a quote as well, where she mentioned that vulnerability is not about winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up when you can control the outcome. What's your perspective about tying bravery to vulnerability?
I think they're inextricably linked, because you can't be vulnerable without bravery. It doesn't exist. Vulnerability is going to require us to step constantly into unknowns. And that we're not vulnerable when we're sitting at our day job doing the exact same thing as we did yesterday. But our heart and mind is wishing for something else. So vulnerability is going to require bravery. And I invite your listeners to read read any book by David Hawkins, specifically his book called Power versus Force, where he ranks the emotions that he measured. So he calibrated different emotions based on their energy and vitality level, and then he ranked them. So shame is the lowest. Shame, guilt, apathy, and then it goes up to anger. These are all the negative states. Once we get to anger, we start tipping into the more positive, creative states. So the next level up above from anger is, what would you guess, Silva? You'd guess it to be bravery.
Bravery.
So the next emotion that David Hawkins has measured, it's calibrated above anger, is bravery and courage. When you experience the emotion of bravery and courage, all the negative emotions dissolve. You cannot experience anger when you're being brave. You cannot experience guilt or shame when you're being brave. It's impossible. When you're being brave, you're going to move into action. So bravery with action is what vulnerability is. On the other side of that is going to be you knowing a new version of yourself. So that's what's been my path, at least for the last 7-8 years. You know, I studied Buddhism for a couple of years. Then I studied Krishna for a couple of years. Then I studied tarot and all these metaphysics concepts. And every single time I was being brave because I was learning a body of knowledge I didn't know. And so in terms of mindset, I feel like instead of bringing a high performance, a goal-oriented mindset, I think there's an invitation to bring curiosity and play. So if we're finding it hard to access vulnerability, why don't we bring curiosity? I wonder what that would look like if I did this. Be curious, bring a playfulness. In a pretend environment, if I asked my boss for a promotion and he yelled at me, he said, "No, I wonder how I'd react. Would I laugh? How could I handle this with more humor?" Or if he or she said yes, you know, what would a surprise feel like in my body? So if you can't do this on your own, it's very hard to do this on your own. We tend to do this with mentors, teachers, counselors, therapists, a very good friend that can hold space for you. Start having these kind of intentional, conscious conversations and go, "Hey, I want to start changing my thought process. How can I do that?" These are ways to. But vulnerability and bravery, they go together.
That's great. So one point you made pretty interesting, which I would like to elaborate more. So as you mentioned that there are different scales, I would say, if I'm right, and after anger, it comes bravery. So anger is generally deemed as a negative side because anger shuts off some of your cognitive abilities to think straight or think clear. So from that, how exactly the transition to bravery happens, if you can elaborate that part?
So just before we do that, anger is a more productive emotion, believe it or not, than shame or guilt. Because in shame or guilt, there is no inertia, there's stillness. We want to hide, we want to sleep excessively, we don't want to be seen. And so once we move into anger, at least there's this, I'm going to show them, or I'm going to go up there and voice my opinion. Right? So anger actually has an energy and vitality that is higher than shame or guilt. However, anger is not a productive emotion because we are still running away from pain. We're still running away from the emotions of guilt. We're still not connected to our purpose as much as when we're brave. So when we are brave, we're accessing a more I can, I will. It's more I can, I will. Anger is more related to I will show them. It's related to an external factor. Bravery is accessing more of our internal center. I'm going to be brave because this is more connected to my purpose. This is connected to, some changes I want to make in my life. Anger tends to have another party that we are directing our anger at. Does that make sense as to the difference?
Yeah, definitely. That is making much more sense now. And it's also, as you mentioned, that it depends on how you can channelize that, whether it would be a kind of adrenaline rush that, okay, I can do that. That is a part of it. And I think that also give a segue about when I was researching about you, I got, I think you mentioned about one incident in the Cronulla Beach back somewhere in 2005, which also give you a very profound experience about certain things in your life. So I don't want to spill the beans. If you would like to kind of elaborate what exactly the incident all about to our listeners.
Well, I was having my first ever surf lesson. I think the date was the 11th. It was 9th or 11th of December 2005. And I grew up, in Australia. We've got a real surfing and beach culture. And ever since I was a child, I wanted to learn how to surf. And surfing can be pretty dangerous and scary. So, getting a lesson is probably the best way, especially when you're an adult. And so I was in my late 20s at this stage, and my sister and I, she got it, I think, as a present for me. So we're at Cronulla Beach, we're paddling out to surf, and the waves are crashing down on me. And I was looking out at the beach, and I saw a crowd gathering, and I was quite confused at the time as to what was going on. Only when my sister and I finished the lesson, it was a full-on lesson, our first ever surf lesson, and we were like literally trying not to drown out in this ocean. It wasn't big waves, but it did feel overwhelming. And we ended up getting to the beach, and on the beach on that same morning, on that same day that we were learning how to surf, were the very infamous Cronulla Beach riots had just happened. And we ended up being in the center, what felt like the center of the Cronulla Beach riots. And all we were doing was learning how to surf. And it was quite a sad time, I guess, in Australian, history because, here we have riots, and here I was, all I was doing was an Australian woman learning how to surf. And from that moment on, I actually put my surfboard away, and because the beach just didn't feel quite comfortable in just a couple of months after. And so I got very unbrave. I put my board away and I thought, I don't ever want to learn to surf. This is too hard. And I don't know if I feel welcomed on the beach. But the thing is, Sarab, is our dreams never die. Our visions and our dreams don't ever die. They don't go away. And it doesn't matter what we do, they bubble underneath the surface. And so it would be 20 years later that I would go and buy another surfboard and I would go and get a surf lesson, and I learned how to surf. So it took 20 years to return back to my dream. And it doesn't matter whether you belong to a race that doesn't fit in, or a sex, or subscribe to a particular group where you feel like you're an outer. That's irrelevant. I found a way to go beyond, any kind of limitations in my mind, and they were only in my mind, not outside. No one was saying on the beach, you can't surf. All the fears that got created on that morning of the riots were really fears within me. They were not external fears that were real. It felt real. And that's what we do with a lot of things regarding our purpose and our dreams and our hopes. We create fears and we make them very real. And fear is false evidence appearing real. That's what fear stands for. False evidence appearing real. I made a lot of stories up that it wasn't safe to surf on the beach after the riots, and it was. And I made a lot of stories up, and years later I thought they're just stories, and my dreams are never going away. So I can now stand up on a surfboard, and it was early this year I went on a surf retreat to Bali. I guess I'm sharing that because it took bravery to overcome my limiting beliefs and to then move into action to, buy the surfboard, get the surf lesson, and believe I could do it again. Because the fear was still there. But the more I got into action with success, the more I proved to myself that my fear was not real.
Yes, that's great. So regarding the bravery you mentioned about, you have your inhibitions, but finally you went back, change your perspective, and start surfing. Regarding the bravery, where is the limit? Like when we talk about bravery and we keep on doing certain things which we believe in, but then where the bravery and wisdom meets, because sometimes when we are brave enough to do something, it can either fall into two buckets. With one of the perspective I was going through is that you can be a foolish of doing certain things which you don't understand. It should not be possible, or it's a kind of there's no use or whatever, the lack of good word. But somewhere you can be like, that is not a wisdom. So you have to gain more wisdom to make a calculative steps in terms of bravery. What's your perspective on that?
I feel like the more brave we are, the more wise we become. We really become wise through mistakes than through success, but we need both. Because you need success to create momentum, but we also need a good dose of failure to learn. And when we fail, we accelerate that learning. So many people, when they're brave, don't want to be with the failure, and all they want is continual success. So we need, when we're stepping into sort of new paradigms, we need to have mentors and teachers and coaches around us to just show us the way forward, especially we're going into new spaces like writing a book or launching a podcast. You probably would have got trained by some people that knew more than you, but they couldn't tell you at all. A lot of it had to be experiential, right? And then through that, you learn to have failures. However, there's generally more success there that's making you think all that effort of trying, all the anxiety and the nerves that came up, it was worth it because look at me succeeding now.
That's so true. I think you're spot on in terms of whatever the actions you take, if you have a right mentors and coaches in your life who can kind of guide you to help you to understand or learn the way you think rather than giving you the answers. That is a true way of, I would say, the awakening and the calling and the inner peace. So let's go towards the last leg of our conversation. What's your next step from here? What's your, you have wrote a book. You are doing wonders in terms of kind of evangelizing the whole an inner peace, healing, psychic readings, and all those things. What's your mission in your life at this point in time?
I think my mission really is to help men and women become brave to live the life that they want to. Because when we're happier. There's three different types of happiness. There's instant gratification, there's happiness connected to people, but the highest form of happiness is always connected to our purpose. And so my mission, and I do this in my psychic readings with clients in my mentor program, and when I teach in my awakening program, I teach you how to connect to your spirit guides and your intuition. My mission really is to connect people back to their intuition, so that when you do that, then you can take brave steps forward. If everyone can be connected to what they're here to do on earth, it'd be a much happier place. Because when we're not connected, we're very resentful, we're very angry, we're feeling we're feeling apathetic. These are the negative states when we're not connected to ourselves. And then we take it out on others around us. So for me, it's about teaching people about what their flavor of brave looks like and what are their little brave acts that they need to do in their life.
That's great. So teaching people how to be brave and get meaning to their life. That is
absolutely
one of the core principle for Sheila. And I would say you also mentioned about how the connecting part of reaching out to the people. And that is the core I would say principle and mission of this podcast as well, that connection. And that's what we are doing at this point, even we are far away. And we are still discussing about connection and talking about all these nice things out there. So that being said, last word, Sheila, how people can reach out to you if they would like to know more about you or your teachings or anything which you would like to share here.
So you can come to sheilav.co and, perhaps book in an intuitive session. I'd love to connect with you and support you to help you understand what your life purpose is. If you're confused what it is, if you're looking for your soulmate, if there's some blocks around your healing, I love giving people transformational sessions. If you're interested in developing your spirituality, connecting to your spirit guides and learning more about that, I have my awakening course that kicks off again early in 2023. And, if you want to get to know me, just read my book, Brave, Courageously Live Your Truth.
That's great. And all these information, we'll put it on the show notes below so you can have a look at it. So that's great. I would end this, conversation with the quote from Buddha, which is, when student is ready, the teacher will appear. That being said, Sheila, thank you so much for your time and providing these conversation. I'm really looking forward for more conversation like these with you, maybe in future. And I'll wish you all the best for your future endeavors.
Thank you, Saurav. It's fantastic being here speaking to your community. Thank you.
That's great.